Around the courtroom. Mr. Registrar, please call the case.
Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning to everyone around the courtroom. This is case number IT0481T, the prosecutor versus Momčilo Perišić. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could we have the appearances for the day, starting with the prosecution?
Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, counsel. Good morning, everyone in the courtroom. Mark Harmon, Rona McKenna, April Carter, Barney Thomas, Rafaela Cruz, and Carmela Haudier for the prosecution.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harmon. Mr. Lukic?
Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning to all the participants in the proceedings in and around the courtroom. General Perišić is represented today in this courtroom by the same defense team: Novak Lukic, Gregor Guy-Smith, Tim Montgomery, Tina Darlitz, Chad Mayer, and Boris Zorko.
Mr. Lukic.
Before I resume, Your Honors, I would like to make two interventions into yesterday's transcript. We will have some minor interventions later on that we'll ask to be verified once we've checked the tape. But this is what I would like to check. Page 14829, line 22 of the transcript. I don't know if that can be shown on our screens right now. If you recall, I spoke of the structure of the 30th Personnel Center within the Personnel Administration at the time, and I mentioned Generals Matović and Zorić. In that context, I said
to General Mladić. Sljedeća rečenica koja piše.
The next sentence.
He could tell Mladić, and this is an administrative matter, quoting, I need a report about the situation with you, with your family. Ono što sam ja rekao.
What I said was, for instance, could he have told Mladić so and so? And that's the way I'd like the transcript to be construed, and I think that's easy to deduce from the sentence before and after, that was the parallel that I was drawing in my argument.
Mr. Lukic, at the very crucial stage of your intervention, there was an overlap, and we don't know what you said because I had a very loud voice in my ear. Mm-hmm. If you look at line 10 of page 2, you'll see that, beg your pardon, line 7, you said, I spoke of the structure of the 30th Personnel Center within the Personnel Administration at the time, and I mentioned Generals Matović and Zorić. In that context, I said English and then overlap.
Da.
So what?
Da.
Can you repeat that?
Evo.
Yes. That was because I switched to English, and that's why there was the overlap with the interpreter. What the transcript reads is, and on this page, page 14829, line 22, is.
For instance, he could tell Mladić, and this is an administrative matter. I nakon toga idete.
And then what follows is something that I have no issue with, but I'll say in English what it was that I said. For instance,
to je ispravka.
Could he have told Mladić? So that's the correction I'd like to make.
I još jednu ispravku imam.
And I have another correction to make. When on page 14834, I spoke of the Erak case. A moment, please.
Ušlo je u zapis.
What reads in the transcript in English, in line 21,
kada sam govorio o...
when I spoke of his return,
Pardon. To je znači...
My apologies. That's page 14834. The entire passage starts in line 24, but continues on the following page. And I said,
To je u zapisnik sljedeći.
This is what the transcript reads. Quite the contrary.
Prove voluntariness. Ono što sam ja rekao.
What I said in Serbian was that, quite the contrary, this showed willfulness.
Zahvaljujem prevodiocima.
Thank the interpreters.
Govorio sam o konkretno...
I spoke of the willfulness exhibited on the part of that individual. And let me go back, Your Honours, to where we left off yesterday. If you remember, in the latter part of my submissions, I spoke of the evidence which, on the one hand, show the commitment taken on the part of the leadership of the FRY and the VJ to peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia. And on the other hand, I use the same evidence to show examples of lack of control, absence of control, and the typical examples where attempts were made at exerting some sort of influence to bring these matters about. I will continue along the timeline that I followed, and what comes next is the 40th session, which is P714. And I'll ask pages 2 and 3 in BCS and pages 2 and 3 in English to be shown. I'm going back to that story of the context that you need to bear in mind, the background, when we're talking about these issues. The session was held on the 5th of August 1995, and I'll remind you that this was the time, a very dramatic time, of the Croatian offensive against the RSK and the mass exodus that took place from Croatia. We don't have the transcript of the session, but we have the minutes, which read as follows. The President of the Republic of Serbia, Slobodan Milošević,
To je ovaj deo.
That's the lower part of the page in English. Contributing to the debate, President of the Republic of Serbia, Slobodan Milošević, noted that all the issues that had been raised were extremely difficult, and that it was important to look at the situation in its entirety. He reminded everyone of the efforts invested by the FR Yugoslavia the previous year to get Republika Srpska to accept the contact group plan, and for the leadership of the RS Krajina to enter into dialogue with Zagreb. Unfortunately, from that moment on, a shift occurred between Knin and Pale.
U meri koliko smo mogli, uticali smo na
And to the extent we were able to, we tried to bear upon the leadership of the RS Krajina to engage in dialogue with Zagreb. I will move on. This is end of quote. I will move off to another example, another illustration which occurred only 10 days later, which was the 41st session of the Supreme Defense Council, P797. Because of the critical situation in view of Operation Storm, which was ongoing, and the exodus of the Serb population from Krajina. This session was held, was actually expanded, as you will see, including all of the senior officers of the VJ General Staff. It was, in fact, an expanded collegium of the VJ General Staff with SDC members. Page 24 of the in BCS and 25 in English is where Milosevic addressed all the generals who were present from the VJ General Staff and said, therefore, I kindly ask you, as colleagues of these people, to work upon them and use your influence as far as possible to put some sense into them, to make them realize that it's absolutely impossible to wage a war against the whole world and the entire NATO pact, and that there is no chance for any military success. Whoever has such half-crazy ideas must realize that the entire people would pay for it. Therefore, we have to exert pressure and explain to them that the only settlement that can be found is through the peace plan. In this way, we will resolve historical and existential issues, and we will get rid of the war threat approaching the borders of Yugoslavia. What followed next was the bombing of Republika Srpska.
Dakle, želja rukovodstva.
Therefore, the wish of the FRY leadership was to exert pressure, to work upon them with a view to putting a stop to the war. The background that I mentioned was the Croatian Muslim offensive in Bosnia, the Serb exodus from the Republic of Serbia and Krajina. The army of the RSK was practically non-existent at the time. And on the other hand, the VRS officers had their salaries returned back in February. And it was the members of the SDS and Perišić who met with Mladić on several occasions. This is what Mr. Harman mentioned. And then we have another meeting of the SDS with General Mladić, where he was invited to take part in the meeting. Interpreter's creation, SDC, the Supreme Defense Council. Now, this was on the 23rd of August, 1995. Exhibit P, 713. Pages 5 and 6 in BCS, and 5, 6, and 7 in English. And that's the part that I would like to read fully.
Izvinjavam se, 5 I 6 je engleski.
I'm sorry. In English it's 5 and 6, and in BCS it's 5, 6, and 7.
U vreme ovog razgovora,
at the time of these discussions, there were talks held with Mr. Holbrooke and the international community with a view to finding a peace solution. And the discussions were going on about who was going to represent the Serbs in these negotiations. And that's the subject of the debate here. Addressing General Mladić, President Milosevic repeated the possible options for stopping the war and resolving the crisis, reiterating that we should strive and fight for peace. He therefore asked the general to make a public statement on behalf of the Army of Republika Srpska main staff consisting of one sentence. In inverted commas, we accept peace. Matters would take a turn for the better for all the Serbs. And then guarantees could be obtained from authorized representatives of the international community for the Serbian population in the territories from which the Serbian army would withdraw. This would be supervised by the UN forces and possibly even by NATO. The people would not have to leave their centuries-old homes. What follows next is a passage that is a bit more difficult to read. It reads, General Mladić was asked to state, what follows next is illegible, whether he would accept a solution negotiated by President Milosevic, again an illegible passage, for a peace and preserved Republika Srpska. The next sentence. He did not wish to state his opinion, explaining his, I presume, view, but I won't speculate, that he is, in inverted commas, only a soldier of the people and not an elected representative and has no such powers. He would leave this to the politicians. The next sentence. The reasoned arguments of what I see here is Presidents Lilić and Bulatović were of no help either. I don't know if the same names are transcribed in English. And another passage that follows next. President Milosevic replied that in the interests of the Serbian people that he seems to be to have so close to his heart, he would sign a statement testifying to his commitment to peace as for the benefit of all, and guarantees. So, and the way to save the Serbs from total destruction, and to give guarantees to the negotiating team that everything agreed will be accepted and implemented. The text of the proposed public statement of General Mladić, commander of the Army of Republika Srpska main staff, reads as follows. I believe I am acting in the best interest of the Serbian people, and hereby state that on behalf of the Army of Republika Srpska main staff, I will accept the peace plan reached by President Milosevic in Geneva. What does the next line of the minutes read? Let's see. General Mladić refused to sign, and then there's an illegible passage, leaving this for a meeting with politicians. Let us go back to the legal issues and findings that you should make on the basis of this evidence. What are the control mechanisms that, according to the OTP, the General Perišić had at his disposal? According to the OTP, the fact that he received his salary from him, and not just Mladić, but the most significant part of the officers' corps. He promotes them and verifies ranks to them, and as the OTP says, they have mechanisms to initiate disciplinary procedures, arrest, and even terminate their service. And in addition to Mladić's spectacular statements that without the FRY, the VRS would not be able to survive, and that he purportedly feels to be a member of a single army. Well, what do you conclude from this? This is simply a way to exert influence on Mladić. His reaction to that influence is that he does not wish to hear them out. He does not wish to hear what Perišić or Milošević have to say. And the justification he draws upon is that he is merely a soldier of the people.
The leadership and the military leadership of the FRY did not try to influence Mladić only. We have presented evidence about direct contacts with other senior officers of the VRS and the SVK. The first question that we put is, why would one influence and persuade and beseech and beg someone who the prosecution claims is de jure a subordinate? I'm going to remind you of Exhibit D344 now. We dealt with that in our final brief as well. We dealt with this with witnesses, and it was under seal at the time because of Mladić's diaries, but I would like us to look at it now within this context that I'm speaking of in open court. This is a meeting between General Perišić and his closest co-workers from the General Staff of the Army of Yugoslavia and practically the entire main staff of the VRS and General Mladić on the 14th of August, 1994. That is to say, after the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia imposed sanctions on Republika Srpska, after the decision was reached to stop the payment of salaries. The meeting took place in Crna Reka. Perišić, at the very outset, conveys the message of the state leadership of the FRY to them, the main staff, and the highest-ranking officers of the Army of Republika Srpska. And the message is that they are asking them not to obey the leadership of Republika Srpska. In Perišić's words, the leadership of Republika Srpska have doomed their own people to a catastrophe. Now, page 8 in English and page 8 in BCS. And in relation to those words and those requests made by the state leadership of the FRY, it is what General Manojlo Milovanović, Chief of Staff of the main staff of the Army of Republika Srpska, is saying. He is uttering words that General Mladić is recording in his diary. And you will recall that during the trial, General Škrbić, who was a witness, confirmed those words to be authentic. This is what he says. Milovanović, you are asking us to reject the authority of our leadership. They were chosen by the people. They are as they are. I cannot refuse to obey such a leadership because you did not refuse to obey your leadership either. In a single sentence here, Your Honors. There is proof of General Milovanović's position, and that has shattered the entire theory of the prosecution about the belonging of these officers to the VJ, about effective control. These officers who received their salaries from the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. At that point in time, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia left them without any salaries. They regulated their status. They verified their ranks. It did not cross their minds to listen to Perišić's request and the request of the state leadership of the FRY and to go by it. In this episode, where were all of these means of control that the prosecutor speaks of? The prosecutor says that Perišić could have said to all of them then, go back, all of you. I hereby issue an order for all of you to go back to the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Otherwise, that is what the state leadership of the FRY asked them to do. You know that that was the decision reached at that session. They all refused this request of the leadership of the FRY. We discussed this subject in quite a bit of detail in our final brief as well, so I'm not going to deal with it anymore at this point. But I would like to draw your attention to something that we wrote in our final brief. However, now I would like to talk about effective control and influence on the SVK. We wrote about that in our final brief in paragraphs 985 through 987, then 993, 994, 995, 1003, and 1156. The prosecution, as we have heard at the beginning of Mr. Harman's remarks, dropped the charges for not preventing the shelling of Zagreb. So the same mechanisms that are claimed to have been indicators of effective control, and those are, as I mentioned a moment ago, all of that became insufficient. Salaries, decisions on appointment, administrative orders, verifications, all of that, all of these mechanisms of effective control, obviously, were totally insufficient for establishing any kind of effective control on the part of General Perišić in terms of preventing the shelling of Zagreb. All of these arguments were refuted by one single influence that could not function in military structures anymore. It certainly could not get close to the level of an order or effective control. Could we please move into private session for a moment?
Please move into private session.
Private session. We're back in open session, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, Mr. Luke.
Jedan kratak deo.
I would like us to have a look at a brief section of an intercepted conversation between Milošević and General Perišić on the 2nd of May 1995, P1314. We know that that is the day when the first shelling of the city of Zagreb took place. Milošević, did you say that that should not be done, Perišić? I told them not to do it anymore. He says, quotation marks, listen, I have to defend myself. I have no choice. You are not helping me. I have to defend myself. End of quote. Milošević. He's crazy.
Let's get to the next page. Okay. See it.
Zatim, general Perišić kaže,
Then General Perišić says, I can tell you that Milošević, now that they are taking care of the ceasefire, he is bombing Zagreb. Another exhibit, P1297. In that document, it says that this intercepted conversation was taking place on the same day at 11:35 a.m. The same two interlocutors. Milošević. How dare they do that? Perišić. Well, how? You can see that all of them are crazy, Mr. President. Milosevic. The peace talks are continuing at 3 o'clock and all of that, but are they doing all of this on purpose? I'm going to provide a comment at this point. Let me give you the context. At 3 p.m., talks are supposed to continue between the Premier of Republika Srpska Krajina Mikelić with the Croatian government about the cessation of hostilities in Western Slavonia. And now Perišić goes on to say, they are not in line with each other. This Martić, I have a feeling that he is lost and that he doesn't think about the situation at all. Milosevic. Did you tell Čeliketic that this must not be done? Perišić. Well, I did tell Čeliketic, but it seems that he and Martić did it without our knowledge. They shelled Karlovac, Sisak, and now, as you see, also Zagreb. Can we now move into private session, please?
The chamber, please move into private session.
We're in open session.
Thank you, Mr. Registrar. Yes, Mr. Lukic.
Da zaključim u vezi.
May I conclude in relation to influence and control? The evidence that was adduced during these proceedings do not show that General Perišić had any mechanism of authority that goes beyond the level of influence, and also that this influence over his alleged subordinates sometimes had limited success, sometimes had some success, and sometimes failed altogether. The prosecutor is trying to show that some of these people were his subordinates and that they wanted to accept what he was saying. However, he did not have any mechanisms in view of these requests made to these persons to make them perceive these requests as orders, naređenja or naredbe. This was not because they did not understand that from a military point of view they could suffer any consequences, because they knew that they were not in the chain of command of the VJ.
As I've already mentioned on a number of occasions, the relationship that actually had a bearing on influence and not on control is a strong argument showing that there was a lack or that there was no control. Now I will move on to another topic that has to do with certain indicia of effective control that the prosecutor is using as and claiming that they were mechanisms that General Perišić had at his disposal to discipline. The prosecutor claims that General Perišić had the mechanisms to discipline his subordinates in the 30th and 40th personnel centers, and that was evidence of effective control. The prosecutor is also trying to show that he did use those mechanisms, but selectively and not when they related to war crimes. At the outset, I would like to stress one more time something that I said yesterday regarding the legal test, the legal standard of the appeals chamber of this tribunal is that the lack of power of a commander to prevent or punish must be met at the time of the commission of the crime. We claim that General Perišić did not have that power at the time of the crimes with which he is charged as the superior officer, nor later on, because the individuals that are identified as perpetrators as his subordinates never entered, not even later, the chain of command of the Army of Yugoslavia, because they were never assigned to any post in any unit of Yugoslavia. His ability to use this mechanism, the prosecutor finds in his de jure authority, which is envisaged pursuant to the law on the Army of Yugoslavia. And then he goes on to cite the law itself, which is P197. Now, we would like to stress that the same law, in its Article 181, Paragraph 1 that I mentioned yesterday, is very clear. It clearly makes a distinction between the authority to initiate disciplinary proceedings against individuals who are members of the army and those outside of it. Specifically, all persons who are outside of the Army of Yugoslavia, for instance, the staff of the Ministry of Defense, the exclusive authority to take disciplinary action against those people is by the in the hands of the Minister of Defense. There is absolutely no authority over such individuals at the General Staff or the Chief of the General Staff of the Yugoslav Army. Perišić did use his legal authority over those individuals who were within the Army of Yugoslavia. So the proceedings that were initiated against Boro Ivanović, General Boro Ivanović, were done in keeping with that. He was a general within the Army of Yugoslavia. Perišić used all his legal powers, initiated disciplinary proceedings against him, and we saw what the outcome was. Mr. Guy Smith mentioned this at its 27th session. The Supreme Defense Council criticized him and said that he should cease all the proceedings, and at the 29th session, the proceedings were quashed against General Perišić's will. This was done by pursuant to a decision of the members of the Supreme Defense Council, and as I mentioned yesterday, and you have it all in evidence, at the 30th session, at the 30th session, they actually promoted this general against the will of General Perišić. Therefore, General Perišić had the exclusive authority to discipline persons who were serving within the Army of Yugoslavia. Now, the case of Colonel Babić that the prosecutor cited as an example that there was a mechanism at the disposal of General Perišić to move for disciplinary proceedings are consistent with this case, and that is our reading of this document. Now, if you look at D2414, and that is the document, Interpreter's Correction P2414, that is the document that the prosecutor used to show that Perišić did have the authority to launch disciplinary proceedings. This document, dated December 1995, shows that Colonel Laza Babić, at that point in time, served at the military post 1122 in Belgrade. In other words, he was assigned to a post within the Army of Yugoslavia at that point in time, unlike other members of the 40th Personnel Center, which were not assigned to any post. And therefore, in this case, General Perišić used his authority in terms of this individual who returned to the Army of Yugoslavia and was assigned to a post within the Army of Yugoslavia to discipline this individual if that was needed. This was the same case applied This is totally different to the case of Bulat. The case of Bulat and other officers within the 40th Personnel Center is in the following. None of them were assigned to a post in the Army of Yugoslavia. Once they are outside the command chain of the Army of Yugoslavia, Perišić did not have any legal authority to initiate any proceedings against them. And this is why the decision in his case was made by the Supreme Defense Council, which was a superior organ to Perišić and the only organ that was superior to him and that could command the Army of Yugoslavia, pursuant to orders by the President of Yugoslavia. And once they take a decision, General Perišić has to implement that under the law. The prosecutor cited the words of General Perišić at a collegium of the Chief of the General Staff on the 6th of November 1995. You remember the words, "I can arrest him, but I won't." That was P2204. But if we put this chronologically in context and see what it was that led Perišić to say those words in the collegium session, I would refer you to P703 to check that. That is the session of the Supreme Defense Council, the 43rd session. The BH page should be page 2 and English page 1. This was on the 30th of August, 1995. In other words, 2 months preceding the words said by Perišić at that other session. My apologies, P708, document P708. And I would like to point you to conclusion number 2. We see that this is a document from August 1995, and please bear that in mind when you assess the evidence shown by the prosecutor. This was a conclusion taken on the 29th of August 1995. Could we have the next page in BCS? We need paragraph 2, where it says, disciplinary or criminal proceedings shall be initiated against professional members of the 40th Personnel Center for whom there are grounds to believe that they have committed a violation of discipline or a criminal offense. At the next session of the Supreme Defense Council, P765, which was held on the 6th of September of the same year, we can again take a look at the conclusions. That's on page 2 in English and page 2 in BCS, because in this order coming from this session, they're discussing the need to specify, to give a more precise explanation and supplement paragraph 4 of the earlier session, and the initiation of those proceedings now sounds as follows. In place of the earlier point 4, and then it says what it sounded like. The following text was adopted. Officers and non-commissioned officers who are found to have acted in a professional and dignified manner and bear no responsibility for the events in the RSK, which unfolded between the 4th and 14th of August 1995, may selectively be assigned to appropriate units and institutions of the Yugoslav Army or to the 30th Personnel Center. That was a conclusion taken by the Supreme Defense Council, which General Perišić had to implement. And also there is a point made there that there were not at that point in time members of the Yugoslav Army, but they should be assigned to it. In other words, the Supreme Defense Council adopts a conclusion that is binding on General Perišić in terms of those individuals who at that point in time are not within the Army of Yugoslavia, but are to be assigned to posts in various units. And there, as we can see, the only thing that is discussed is the crimes that they had committed, if they had committed them, between the 4th and 14th of August 1995, and that is what this decision of the Supreme Defense Council refers to. This was the case of Colonel Bulat. He was not assigned to any post or any duty in the Army of Yugoslavia. There were certain crimes that are discussed here that had to do with his surrender of his corps, and that is what this relates to for the period of time as mentioned. Now, you have to bear another thing in mind. At that time, between August and November or December, the Republic of Serbia and Krajina and the Army of the Republic of Serbia and Krajina no longer existed. The military courts no longer existed, nor any military disciplinary courts in the Krajina, unlike the Serbian system where